Again, thank you so much for joining us for this Let's Discuss A Course in Miracles by the Foundation for Inner Peace. We're holding these Let's Discuss online webinars as an expression of our vision of extending love through the teachings of A Course in Miracles more widely. Judy Skutch Whitson is presenting this webinar, and she is the founder and chairwoman of the Foundation for Inner Peace. She was serving on the faculty of New York University when she was introduced to Doctors Helen Schucman and William Thetford, co-scribes of A Course in Miracles. They entrusted her with its manuscript and the role of publishing the course. She has been a student of the course for over 45 years, or almost actually, as she told me just prior to this webinar. So we always start our webinar with a prayer in all of our meetings, actually. And this prayer is particularly appropriate for our topic today. So we invite you to join us and say it along together as we go through. I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent Him who sent me. I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do, because He who sent me will direct me. I am content to be wherever He wishes, knowing He goes there with me. I will be healed as I let Him teach me to heal.
Welcome everyone to my garden. It is in truth my garden, only it's a picture of it, but it's exactly how it looks today. And I always feel comfortable talking to you from here. It gives me nurture, it gives me peace, and that's the place where I sit and I meditate, and that's the way I really get calm enough to be able to talk to you today. First of all, we're in terrible times. We know it. And it's difficult to ignore the climate of these times when we're so absorbed in the threat of the coronavirus. Fear is all around us. I pray this discussion will be helpful in guiding us how to change our minds from fear to love. In this world, we're given helpers all around us. They can be in form or they can be perhaps in mind. And so we're going to talk today about the greatest helper of all, our inner teacher, our inner guide, the Holy Spirit, the voice for God. Here is something that I thought it would be a good thing to start with. The Holy Spirit will help you reinterpret everything that you perceive as fearful, and it will teach you only what is loving. In that sense, we can remember who we are. And I'm going to tell you today a little bit about who I am in this form and how I have journeyed along with the Holy Spirit, eventually coming to know my inner teacher, my inner guide, my partner, my great companion so well that the very practice of asking about almost everything has led me to a great deal more peace. I certainly hope that'll be the case with you. Well, I could pick a place to start. I could pick almost any place to start, as could you. But I think I'm going to start with my earliest memory. My earliest memory was one that was kind of frightening. I was sitting with my parents by an open window, and I suddenly fell out. Now, as I was falling, of course I was terrified, but it seemed to be in slow motion. And in the slow motion, I remember thinking, this isn't safe. This isn't safe. And then this cry came out of me as I hit the ground. And it was only a first-story window. I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. My parents got me almost immediately, and they looked me over and ascertained there was nothing the matter with me at all. But I still was screaming, I want to go home, I want to go home. And finally, they tried to calm me down by telling me, look, here's your house. You are at home. And I couldn't explain what I meant. But in those few seconds, something happened. And I think it was probably the fear that pushed me into wanting safety, wanting peace, wanting grounding, wanting my real home. Of course, I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't express it, but that never left me. It never left me at all. And so I think in a way, it was kind of a blessing, me falling out a window, because then I can refer to it all through my life as I know that this is not home. This is not our reality. Our reality is someplace else. And I would finally spend the rest of my life looking for that. When I was growing up, I certainly had a sense still in me of a direction in which to go. I'll call it a more amorphous feeling because it wasn't defined. But the feeling was one of, part of me sort of knew that I should read this book, that I should pay attention to this study, that I should go to the synagogue with my father, who was, of course, Jewish, as was I, and as I am still, and that I should learn to pray, and I should learn about God. All of that felt very good, but it had nothing to do with my home. It had a lot to do with comfort. It had a lot to do with family values. It had a lot to do with, morals, ethical sense. And it was very good for that. And I did indeed pursue my Hebrew studies, which were also biblical, for a long time, until I went to college, in fact. Along the way, books would seem to drop upon me. First, it was children's books, and eventually it was books that were for young adults, as we call them today, and then books that I could actually pick up in college and the college courses I chose that seemed to be leading me in a direction of searching. It was not as clear as that. I'm being much more clear about it now and telling you the story, but then we know what hindsight is. I do know, though, that there was definitely a progression. It felt as if I was moving along a road that was my road to travel. But it still wasn't everything. The first strong memory I'd like to tell you about, and there were some along the way, but the first really dynamic one was when I was a young mother. I first had a child, a son, a wonderful little boy, and he was a challenge because he was extremely bright. And I loved the challenge, and of course loved him. The next child was a daughter, and her name was Tam. And as she started to be able to speak, articulate, I noticed that there was something a little bit different about her. And what was different about her, she seemed to answer questions that were in my mind, and even before I could voice them. And I would wonder, why would she do that? And once I asked her, and she said, I heard you, Mommy. And I said, no, I didn't say anything. She said, yes, you did. I heard you. Well, then I had an idea that there was something telepathic going on. And so I started to read a lot of books about that, as many books as I could find, because I wanted to be educated on what to do and how to feel about this particular gift that she had. But one night, after I put both my children to bed, and Jonathan was in his room and Tam was in hers, as I was walking downstairs, I heard talking coming from my little daughter's room. She was about 3. Well, I thought perhaps one of them had left the other room. Well, they'd gotten together somehow or other, even though they weren't supposed to. And I was going to separate them and put them back to bed again. But I walked into her room and she was sitting up in her bed and she was talking to someone, but no one was there. And for an instant, I was kind of surprised, and I realized, children have invisible friends. That's okay, she probably has a little invisible friend. So I said, honey, who are you talking to? And she said, my friend. I said, your friend? Yeah, my friend. I said, oh, is your friend a little teeny elf? No, mommy. I said, is your friend as big as you are? No, mommy. Is your friend as big as I am? Mommy, my friend is bigger than you. It's bigger than this room. It's bigger than this house. It's bigger than this whole sky. And you can't see my friend. I took a deep breath and I said to her, does your friend talk to you? And she looked at me surprised. She said, of course, mommy. Of course my friend talks to me. That's why I'm talking to my friend. Well, something inside me said, enough questions. And so I backed out of the room very carefully and I closed the door and I started to think. That kind of thinking spurred me on to do something more formal about my search. And with that in mind, I concentrated mostly on her psychic abilities because that was able to be investigated. And I went back to school. Luckily, I lived in New York City, and so there were classes I could take, graduate courses in experimental parapsychology. And I learned a good bit about what was going on in research in that science. And I thought that I was really, really happy, and I was moving along at a very interesting pace. And finally, it culminated with me being asked to teach at New York University. And teaching at New York University was a big surprise for me, particularly the subject I was asked to teach, which was experimental parapsychology. See, I had done a lot of reading. And I didn't expect the classes to be large. It didn't make any difference. I just showed up and was very surprised to find out that it filled an auditorium, not a classroom. There were so many people coming from all over. In the evening, it was adult education who wanted to know more, the same way I did. Keeping a lesson ahead of them wasn't too hard, but I did find over the years that it was a very satisfying pursuit and enabled me to be part of a growing community of people who were likewise searching. One day, I'll say it, not fateful day, I realized that I was terribly unhappy. This was new, it came upon me kind of suddenly, and I was in despair. And in this despair, I felt as if I was hurtling down, like spiraling down from a very comfortable, happy state of engagement, of safety, in the sense that I had a home, a husband, family, friends, career, children. But nothing seemed to make any difference to this deep, deep emptiness I was feeling. And one night in 1975 in the spring, I locked myself in the bathroom, which was very well insulated from the rest of the house. And I called out from the bottom of my heart, won't someone up there please help me? Won't someone up there please help me? And I meant it from the bottom of my being. You gotta be careful when you ask a question with such passion, because this question got answered for me very quickly, but not in the form I expected. But I did ask. And the answer was an introduction to two professors of psychology at Columbia University School of Physicians and Surgeons, who had a deep, dark, guilty secret they were hiding. But they asked me to meet them, which I did. And at the same time that I met Dr. William Thetford, Dr. Helen Schucman, I also met Dr. Kenneth Wapnick. And I was in their office, and Helen and Bill were telling me their story, which they had kept very secret. The story had to do with how A Course in Miracles came to them. They had also asked, you see, and they had also gotten an answer. Well, I very much wanted to see this document, of course. And Bill Thetford opened up this secret filing cabinet, and he brought out 7 heavy thesis binders, black, in which the manuscript of the course was housed. And I opened it up to the first page. And I read, this is A Course in Miracles. with a closing. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. I knew without knowing that my question was being answered. I knew that I was being introduced to something that would help me in my childhood quest to find home. That was the very beginning. And along the way, I think I forgot to ask Tara to show one of the slides. Sorry, got carried away.
Here is a slide. How about I read this, and Judy, this is a beautiful section from chapter 5 of A Course in Miracles. When the ego was made, God placed in the mind the call to joy. This call is so strong that the ego always dissolves at its sound. That is why you must choose to hear one of two voices within you. One you made yourself, and that one is not of God, but the other is given you by God, who asks you only to listen to it. The Holy Spirit is in you in a very literal sense. His is the voice that calls you back to where you were before and will be again. It is possible even in this world to hear only that voice and no other.
It is possible even in this world to hear only that voice and no other. You might be interested to know that the Holy Spirit, the voice for God, your internal teacher, your higher self, is mentioned 1,472 times in A Course in Miracles. 1,472 times this is mentioned. We are dealing with a very important subject today, listening to the voice for God. And as I spent time with Helen and Bill, because that did indeed happen, as the time went by, I learned in sitting with them and reading and practicing the Course every day, except weekends, I learned that we had to not just ask individually for help, but we had to ask questions together. People were coming to see what was going on. We told them about the Course. I did, at least in my classes, and they would visit, and Helen and Bill and Ken and I would gather, and we talked to them about it. And always, before we even had people come to visit, we would ask together, should these people be told about the Course? So we started very slowly asking together. I was a newbie. They may have been doing it much longer than I, and I think so. But let's say as a group, we started very slowly asking questions and then getting answers. And we would get more and more and more guidance in a way that we knew was accurate for us because we tried it and it worked. And one of the times that we were sitting and asking for guidance, we decided that we would find out what's to be done with this manuscript. Bill had a good idea that he felt it should be shared with the world. Helen said absolutely not. So right away, there was a difference of opinion. And one day, after quite a while, 6 months to be exact, we were talking about, should it indeed be made public? And we had privately spoke with a few publishers in advance. And I think I went off camera. Something happened. Excuse me, everybody. Sorry.
You're not off camera. You're still on. Don't worry. I just changed one setting. Sorry. Keeping you on your toes.
We're still new at this. And look, I don't have the skills. I'm very old. In any event, I'm not losing my train of thought here. We were asking what we should do about the Course, having spoken in person privately with a few publishers who had heard about it. And each time we thought that, oh, well, that'll be a good idea. We can have Harper and Collins, or Doubleday, or someone like that published the course. We got the answer no when we asked. We didn't get the reason, we got the answer no, not them. And finally, on Valentine's Day, 1976, as we sat again, having seen a group of people who wanted to publish the course, we asked and we got no, it shouldn't be there. Well, who should it be then? And we got very specifically only those who will do this, meaning study the course, the rest of their lives and nothing else, who will put it in a not-for-profit foundation, and who will make sure it's not split up. Well, we looked around and realized that who in the world could that be except us? And we got the equivalent of, thought you'd never ask, but we realized at that time for the first time that we were going to do this. We were going to do this even without knowing how. The without knowing how was really important, because by this time we realized that we would learn how, and we would learn that from the Holy Spirit. Something happened that many of you know, but I think there are many here today who don't know, that when we asked, we also asked, where is the money to come from? Because we knew publishing a book of this size, hardcover, had to be pretty expensive. And we closed our eyes again, and we asked that question, where is the money to come from? And we each got a different answer, but the answer all fit into a whole picture. And Helen got, Judy will know. Bill got, it's already done. Ken have received the message that all is at peace. And what I got was make the commitment first. And so without having any funds and without having any foreknowledge, we said, yes, we committed to doing it. And the very next day, I got a telephone call from a man who lived in Mexico and had a not-for-profit organization. And he told me he had seen a copy of this course, which wasn't yet in hardcover print, but was in small volumes so people could start looking it over easily. And he said to me, you really have to publish this course. And I said, coincidentally, last night, we were just talking about that and we made the commitment to do it. But you must know, having your own not-for-profit, how hard it is to raise funds. And he said, that's why I'm calling you. I was guided last week to sell a property, and I'm sending you a check, and you should get it in a few days at least. And it's a gift for you to publish the course as soon as possible. We did get that check, and by the time the course was published in its first edition, we had about $180 left over from the donation. Make the commitment first. Ask the Holy Spirit. I think you're getting the drift of how this goes. Well, I must say that there was always a discussion about the voice, because Helen kept calling it the voice. And when I first met her and she told me about the voice, I asked her, did the voice have a name? And she was a little bit embarrassed, and she said, oh yes, I was afraid you were going to ask me that. And I asked her then, what's the name? What's the voice called? And she said, well, he says he's Jesus. And I said, well, is it? And her face changed. She was embarrassed no more. And she said, with a smile in her eyes, oh yes, it is. We had a lot of discussion, as you can imagine, about the voice. Because is it the Holy Spirit? Is it Jesus? Is it my higher self? Is it my inner teacher? Is it God? Well, I would rather have Helen tell you what she felt about the voice. And Tara is about to play for you a film, very scratchy, by the way, the audio. It was done in 1976, and it was at a gathering, so there was no way to filter the sound. We didn't have the equipment then that we have today. So you may have a little trouble following up. This is my suggestion. I think I was guided to play this for you today because, number one, it's the only recording we have of her. And number two, if you want to close your eyes and just listen, you might get the feeling of how she struggled with the voice herself. And you might get the feeling of beginning to know more about what the Holy Spirit is. So here we go.
Regarding the voice you heard in describing A Course in Miracles, did it come from outside or from within?
There's nothing that I would call ordinary audition about this at all. It doesn't really... It's a curious thing, and it will be very difficult to explain. Somebody asked me, was it as though your hand was moving? No, I wrote perfectly voluntarily. In response to, I call it a voice, but a voice has sounds as though it has something to do with hearing. I didn't hear anything. I think it's a sort of hearing that you can't really describe. It doesn't have anything to do with ears or waves hitting a drum or anything on that order. I don't really know. I think maybe I'm using the wrong word when I say hear. I sort of recognized it. It was very rapid. I could even, if I didn't catch a phrase, I could sort of say, would you mind doing that again, you know?
This was in your mind?
This is strictly mental. Otherwise I would consider it hallucinatory activity. I don't feel it was that.
Is it comparable to anything in terms of how we hear ourselves talk, or like you talk to yourself?
It wasn't my voice. It couldn't have been, because it talked about a whole area with which I am entirely unfamiliar.
What about sub-vocalizing? When you're sub-vocalizing, you're hearing the words. You're actually hearing them.
No, there's no vocalization. It's a process that I really would find impossible to explain. It's never happened to me before. I don't have any knowledge of the area so that I wouldn't be able to say like X or whatever it is, because I wouldn't know what X did.
You could hear the words clearly in your mind even though you didn't hear a sound?
I knew that that was the word. I think knew may be a better word than heard. I did not know consciously at the beginning of the sentence how it was going to end, and that puts me under a further handicap in terms of ordinary language, because ordinarily, I think, if you're going to say a sentence, you know what it's going to be. You sort of get the gestalt immediately. But I didn't. And it came very easily, very rapidly, very smoothly, I guess even painlessly, except that it annoyed me to death, but that's irrelevant. I guess here isn't the right word. I could stop any time or pick it up any time, and I did in cabs and subways and anything, or sort of between telephone calls. But you're raising a question I don't think, Dave, I can answer. I really am trying.
So a certain mechanism went on there, because you heard something, you translated into the shorthand style.
Yes, but I'm used to shorthand. I use it for group therapy sessions, so that shorthand is quite familiar to me.
So you don't even
it was really a matter of speed.
So you really
I couldn't have kept up with it in ordinary writing.
Oh, you couldn't?
Oh, no, it's very rapid. I needed the shorthand.
What about automatic writing? A thing when pen takes over and writes for the person. The person doesn't have any control. Is that similar to what you're describing?
No, that didn't happen at all. I could have stopped at any kind, and I frequently did. And I was very frequently interrupted, so that I would have to stop there. I didn't lose awareness of where I was or what I was doing. My interns kept barging in for therapy sessions. Now, Bill always says, well, I'm just naturally dissociated, which I never take as a compliment. But maybe it's that, and I think in a sense it must be, because I haven't caught up with it yet. And I don't understand it, and I still feel very baffled by it. And I'm also still just a little uncomfortable with the material, but I'm getting used to it now. And I'm also getting used to a feeling that it was the right thing to have done. The only curious thing that I do know, and this is curious, I am used to doing pretty much what I want to, and I do make my own decisions. But for some reason or other, it never occurred to me not to do this. I thought that this should be done. I made every effort to keep it without me. I did not want to intrude on it, and I felt that it was a matter of personal integrity not to. I really did not interfere with it. I think the thing that I found upsetting about it was it went against everything I believed, which is very hard to do. But I felt it was much more important. I know what I believe, but I didn't know what this was going to do next. And I was very pleased with its coherence and with its being very consistent, which is something that I would regard as a mandatory criterion. It read very well.
Yeah.
And I know the pain with which I managed to get something to read halfway as well as that, which is very agonizing. And this came out very quickly, talked about a system I don't know anything about, and confused me no end. I'm still cross-eyed. That's all I can really say about it.
Tried to edit it at times, didn't you?
Yes, I did. It would bother me, and I would never forget what it was originally, and I would feel kind of uneasy about it. But since I do so much editing, I figured, well, I'm improving this, and that's it. But then later, when it would pick it up again and refer back to that, then it would be inconsistent because it would use the original word. So then I very quickly learned, don't do that because you will interfere with the internal consistency. So then I stopped doing that. Very quickly I learned that that was a very bad mistake. So we went back and we changed all the words back into its original form.
Did you remember the word, or did you have to go back and just ask at the time?
And I used to tell Bill that used to be, whatever it was. But sometimes, I wouldn't say more than 2 or 3 times, I didn't know. But I was aware that there was a goof-off in through there, and I would feel the goof-off more than the right answer. And then I would sort of look at a blackboard in my head and see it written, the word it should have been. And I would ask, can I see it on the blackboard?
You would ask and also see it?
Yes, if I was undecided. I'd forgotten to mention that.
Would there also be that knowingness that accompanies it? Like,
No, then I would be reading it. If it was on the blackboard, I would see it in letters.
Then it was a very visual thing in your mind.
And then it was visual. Ordinarily, it isn't. But I think that modality had to come in where I had kind of lost my way in it, and I really didn't know what the word should be.
Could you close this off any time you didn't want to hear or do it?
Oh, yes.
In other words, it was strictly your option.
Oh, very much. Except that it kind of nudges me if I didn't do it when I was sort of supposed to. Sometimes I couldn't sleep, and then I would become very restless. And at one point, I didn't do it for about 3 weeks. I felt quite pushed around by this, and enough is enough. And it was kind of a rough 3 weeks. But I didn't know when it was finished, and I didn't know when I was supposed to stop. The course came first. Well, the text is what we originally had called the course. The text is the right word for it.
Uh-huh.
That came first, and when that was through, I think there was something like a 3-month hiatus.
You had no urge to write then?
A while before I started in again, I said to Bill and also to Jonathan, I have a horrible feeling there's a workbook that goes with this, but maybe it's just maybe I'm going to be let off on this one. But I did know it, and it became increasingly clear that was it. And I knew at that time there would also be a teacher's manual, because that's obviously what professors have to teach with.
Mm-hmm.
And I did feel that it was going to organize itself in that way. And it did.
Do you feel that it's over now?
I think so. The only thing that I might be able to do, although I would hesitate to do it because I feel very strongly that my commitment included having nothing to do with anything psychic. I feel that very strongly. I think I told you the story of the original commitment in that line. If I didn't, it's in my autobiography and you'll see it. I think it's through. I do think, and under certain circumstances, I might be able to do this and might want to, if it were very helpful to somebody. I think there are questions I could probably write an answer to. But I think I would really want to do that, not as a major part of anything, because I don't think it's very important, but if someone were in trouble and it would be helpful, I might try to do it. I haven't had any occasion yet.
So you continue to hear the voice.
Oh no, I could ask what to do about something, particularly if the three of us are together. And we would ask, and we would get an answer. We generally get the same answer. If we don't, we'll sort of feel somebody's off a little bit, and we'll try again. But we generally do. According to the Course, we should, and everyone could, ask about anything and get an answer. Sometimes it's very surprising to me, and one of the things that I think we mistakenly do is to figure, oh, well, this is unimportant, or this is, you know, this, or to cut out certain areas from the process of asking, which I'm sure is a mistake, because I don't think we should evaluate. I think you can ask anything. And I would doubt very much if anything is likely to happen to me that wouldn't happen to anybody else. If he wanted it to. I mean, or if he felt this was the way he wanted to go. I can't imagine that. In fact, I'm sure it isn't true. The Course is rather explicit on that.
So you do hear now and then.
I hear whenever I ask.
In other words, at this point now, it's really a matter of asking.
Well, now it's a little more a question of personal guidance as to what to do. We didn't know whether we were supposed to come here, for example, so we asked about that. And we all three thought we should come to California. This was not where we intended to go. And we did feel that Judy sort of came, you know, at a particular time. We felt very much that she was an integral part of this. But we asked for this because I've been very, very careful about this. I am a very careless person in some ways. I lose everything. But I never lost anything of this Course. People would stop me in the subway and say, "Miss, you forgot your something or other," and hand it back to me. Taxis would honk their horns, you know, and say, "You left something in the back seat." My secretary would say, "Are you sure this belongs in this case report? Doesn't sound right." And it was impossible to lose this Course, and I tried. But it sort of kind of followed me around in an odd kind of way. People would send it back to me, anything, you know, and I always got it back. And we never lost anything, which is incredible for me. You have to know me because I really do lose anything. We once went to a game thing, you know, where you had to guess from a one-sentence thing who it was. And somebody said, "My God, where is it?" And the whole faculty said, "Helen Schucman." They recognized it immediately. I'm better now. I think this has been a good experience.
You're the absent-minded professor type?
No more. Now I'm just absent-minded.
Having not heard that in a while, I was sitting here smiling at the happy memories and the strained and difficult memories it also brought up. But I think that for me, it was important to share that with you now, because you can tell the hesitation and the puzzlement and the wonder that Helen experienced as for 7 years. She listened to an inner voice, as she described, not auditory, more like thought impression, she once told me. She listened to an inner voice give her the exact wording to take down that enables us to have this document printed into a form we can carry and study and gone in all different media, digital, etc. How that very act of willingness allowed Helen to listen to a voice which was such a surprise to her. I think one of the most important rules for me is when I started the process of asking for inner guidance was the willingness. And I remember showing the slightest willingness and 1,000 angels rushing to help. The slightest willingness is enough when you're asking for guidance, because the Holy Spirit waits to be invited, although it's always present, constantly with you. The invitation has to come from us. Once in a great while, something like happened to Helen might happen in a different form, and it is unusual, and we shouldn't measure ourselves and our listening process by it. But if it works for us to keep on practicing the process. We did get the opportunity to have special messages as we worked together on getting the course ready for publication. And the best part of these special messages were, number one, it was coming from the same source that gave Helen the book, which she also called Jesus, and it helped us on our way. So I would say this one was kind of important. You have been told to ask the Holy Spirit for the answer to any specific problem, and that you will receive specific answer if such is your need. There are decisions to make here, and they must be made, whether they be in illusion or not. They must be made, whether they're in illusion or not. Many students of the course talk about not even asking for guidance in their daily lives because they want to save it for a more prayer-like situation or something they consider much more important, like in relationships and changing their minds from fear to love or from dislike to acceptance. But these special messages reminded us daily that in this dream that we are dreaming together, in this non-reality, because it's impermanent, that we can still get messages, and that we absolutely must to help us on our way. That was very, very comforting to me, and I hope it will be to you too, because sometimes it's confusing to say, what should I ask the Holy Spirit? How do I ask the Holy Spirit? Well, asking the Holy Spirit isn't very hard. As I said, you only have to want to. And the form in which you ask it is totally irrelevant. And the form in which you receive it will be specifically for you. Do not ever expect to get the kind of guidance that your friend, your husband, your mother, your grandmother, or someone you work with get. It will be specifically for you because your internal teacher is only for you. The Holy Spirit is the link between the dream world, which it knows very well, and the world of formlessness, which is God. The Holy Spirit, you can say, is also the mediator, and it helps interpret for us who are so limited in the dream, the memory and the love for God. So listening to Helen, I think you could hear that and possibly even relate to it too. I'll come back to the story because this is sort of a story of my life. It was very clear to me that as we started to publish the course itself, we were going to have some challenges. And what were the challenges? Our relationships. Put 4 people together in a room who are passionate about what they do, and everyone has a different opinion. And the only way we could resolve these differences, of course, was to stop, first of all, to remember, to stop and to ask. And we asked together. One particular time, which is a little bit humorous, but it wasn't so humorous at the time, Helen was determined when it came time to choose the cover of the course, that it be black with gold writing. Well, and only say A Course in Miracles on it. It didn't feel right to me, and it didn't feel right to Bill either. I never really asked him whether it felt right to him, but we did argue about it for half a day, and we tried all sorts of ways to convince Helen that it shouldn't be black. It didn't feel right. And finally, Ken, who always stopped Helen midstream, said, Helen, let's stop arguing now and let's ask together. So we did. And I remember so well the look on Helen's face when I opened my eyes after my internal questioning of the Holy Spirit. And I saw on her face first disgust, and then acceptance, and then complete joy. He says it should be blue, dark blue. Well, obviously, it's blue with gold letters. Even that, we asked what kind of paper it should be on. We asked everything along the way, because remember, we had no expertise in this. None of us were a publisher, and we were doing it ourselves. How can one even expect to undertake something that you know nothing about and go and bring it to fruition? You ask within. To me, that's always the answer. You ask within. I call asking the Holy Spirit process habit making. You make it a habit of asking. And when you know you're comfortable and that you do it in every situation where you think you need higher guidance, then you know that the habit making process has taken hold and you're in good hands. We have another slide that we're going to show you now. I love this particularly, so if you want to speak it for us, Tara.
Certainly. So this is from chapter 12, section 7, paragraph 3. The Holy Spirit is invisible, but you can see the results of his presence, and through them you will learn that he is there.
And I think I can relate this particular quotation to just about everything we're talking about. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't smell it, you can't feel it, but the Holy Spirit is there. And when you ask for guidance, then the results are very visible. Be it what color book you should publish, or how do you handle a situation that's difficult in your life. My husband died about 2.5 years ago, but in essence, he's always with me. So I'd like to tell the story on him, and he's not here to stop me. When we first got together, my husband was a student of A Course in Miracles, and that's how we met. And we agreed that this would be our life practice and that we would bring all our problems to the Holy Spirit to solve. We didn't always remember, of course, but this one time that touched me so much because it was visible, it was made visible to me how it helped him. He came back one day from work, and at that time we were living in Washington, D.C., and Whit was the chairman of the division at the Library of Congress, which is a group of scholars, well-trained to answer questions that are necessary to be answered by both the Senate and the House. And this particular time, as Chief of Foreign Affairs and National Defense, he was asked a question that he gave to his staff to answer, and a particular senator received the answer and didn't like it. He didn't like it so much that he called Whit on the carpet and told everybody that he was going to talk to him about it because he was the boss and he should have made sure he got a better answer. So Whit was going in for probably quite a tongue lashing from the senator, and he was nervous. And he wasn't usually a nervous person, but I could see that day that he was disturbed about it. And so we did this for each other all the time. I said, before you go, let's sit down and ask the Holy Spirit together for you to find peace in this situation, which is exactly what we did. He came home later in the day and he was beaming. And this is the story he told me. He said he went into the senator's office and he was almost quaking because the senator's aide had said to Whit, "Oh boy, are you in for it?" And Whit got into the office and he was ready to apologize profusely before the senator said anything, when suddenly On the senator's desk, Whit noticed a fairly large picture and realized it was the senator and his family in China. And my husband was a China scholar and had spent many years there, also spoke Chinese fluently, and he was stunned. Oh, and so he remarked immediately about the picture. And the senator said, oh, do you know where that is? And then Whit replied, oh, yes, he'd been there. And the conversation was off for almost an hour about how wonderful their experiences were in China. And then just when Whit was ready to start getting to the point, the secretary came in and said, Senator, your next appointment is here. And the senator put out his hand and he said, this has been delightful. We're going to have to do this more often. How about lunch next week? And Whit said, but sir, I wanted to apologize to you. And the senator said, oh, nothing, think nothing of it, forget about it. It seems like a very small thing, but we all have situations like that. We're fearful of someone, we feel separate, we're alone. We really do not know how to respond to a difficult situation, a difficult relationship. What should we do? You turn to the Holy Spirit and you say, please take this fear from me. I'm willing to let it go. Or please help me see this thing differently. Whatever you choose, whatever language you want, but the idea is that you're willing to let it go. Willing to let go how you are perceiving the situation and have the Holy Spirit show you love. In every situation that we ask for help, the answer is always love, but in all different forms. We'll always recognize it as love. Now, how do you recognize when the Holy Spirit is advising you or talking to you? How do you recognize? A lot of people ask that question. First of all, you're willing to ask, so you're inviting the Holy Spirit in, that you know. Second, something is said to you. You get an idea, thought transference. You come across a book. You turn on a TV show. A friend walks in the room. The answer comes through all different forms. Not one of them is the same as someone else's because it's interpreted differently, but it's yours. It's just for you. How do you know which voice it is? The ego, which screams separation, and it screams fear, because the Holy Spirit always speaks love. It always is all win. And very often it makes you smile. At least that's the way I test it out. But I think you could do the same thing. One of the things that I really thought I would share with you at this moment is something that happened to us along the way of being together in a group and pursuing the function that we were given with the Foundation for Inner Peace in the publishing of the course. Bill Thetford was a very mild-mannered man. Helen was very dynamic. Bill saw the world through joy. A lot of puns were his way of reacting to a conversation. He always saw the funny side. He wasn't necessarily very peaceful, but he did use humor a lot. And the humor very often would smooth over the bad places. One day in this particular situation, he wasn't feeling very humorous. A book had been published that he felt very critical of. He was not seeing it kindly, and he was feeling that his judgment was the correct judgment, that certain things probably shouldn't have been written. And I can say in transparency that he was feeling very angry at Ken Wapnick. Ken Wapnick was a dearly devoted, not only student of the course, but teacher of the course, and at this point was just starting to write books. And Bill took umbrance with one of the books that had come out. And he was actually convinced that he wanted to say something about it. And since he was non-confrontational, he needed friends to help him. And so a few of our friends got together and they decided to be Bill's support system so that Bill could directly confront his brother, Ken. Well, Ken did not live in California at that time. Bill did, so Ken was coming west to see us all. And one of the things that Bill needed to tell him was that he disliked what he had published. And Bill came over to where I lived with my husband earlier than the meeting was called, and he was just pacing back and forth and revving up to be confrontational. And I found it pretty uncomfortable, so I did what Ken almost did all the time with us. I said, Bill, why don't you sit down next to me and hold my hand, and let's ask the Holy Spirit for guidance on this, because we're not feeling peace. And he said, okay. And he sat down, and two of us sat in quiet about 15 minutes until the doorbell rang. We got up, and in came Ken and the people who were going to be supporting Bill in this. And Bill got up and he walked to Ken and he said, welcome, Ken. I'm so glad to see you. It was over. There was no anger left in Bill. There was no judgment about the book. It wasn't important. He saw his brother and he was glad. Now, I should add that the people who came to support him to be confrontational didn't know that we had sat 15 minutes in advance and asked for the Holy Spirit's guidance. So they were pretty concerned and were trying to rev Bill up again for him to say something. But he turned to them and he said, we are all perfection. And he meant it. Those are the miracles that we like to talk about when we talk about A Course in Miracles. The shift in perception from fear to love. A Course in Miracles is about relationships. This is exactly why it exists, for us to get over the constant judgment of each other and see each other through God's eyes, through God's vision, through the Holy Spirit's guidance. See each other as one in love. And in this particular situation, it really worked. There are many. And from my mind, I'm going to have to pick another one. She's somewhat the same, but it's our process. And that's really what I can attest to. At this particular time, we had just started with a program of translations. Now, Helen had said A Course in Miracles can never be translated. In her lifetime, it wasn't. She was insistent that it couldn't be. It's funny, we didn't feel the need to ask at the time, and maybe if we'd asked, we would have gotten a different answer, and so would she. But she was nearing the end of her life, and we just didn't get involved and weren't ready to be involved in such an enormous task. Eventually, we were. And we had to form a committee, and it seemed very, very necessary that the two people who knew the most in how to do this project participated as partners. And the partnership was Ken Wapnick, who would be and was the teacher of all the translators to make sure that they actually knew and understood the course so they could translate it. And my husband, Whit, who had been a manager of information for many years and who would manage the project. And they worked pretty well together. They weren't that close in the beginning, but they certainly became closer until one day when it all broke apart. Ken had felt a translation should be handled one way, and Whit had felt the translation be held and worked in the opposite direction. And as much as they talked, and certainly they were both good talkers, as much as they talked this over, they couldn't come to any agreement, and it was getting more and more strained. At this point, we were living in California. Ken was living in New York, and it was even harder communicating on the telephone. And one day, it felt really important for Whit and for me to go to New York to see what could be worked out with Ken, because we were on the verge of a break. And to me, that would have been disaster. It doesn't matter what the issue was, but believe me, each person felt he was right. The night before Ken was to visit us in our hotel, Whit was pacing the room the same way Bill did. And he said that he didn't think that this was going to work out because he knew that Ken wasn't going to listen to him. And he gave me all the reasons why it wouldn't work. And frankly, I was getting frightened. And finally we went to sleep, and Whit still was talking. And it occurred to me that what we did with each other always was to help each other through really dark spots. And this was a dark one. And I said, you know, honey, you've helped me do this in the past so many times. So right now, would you let me help you? Give it to the Holy Spirit. Just give it to just do that. And he said, I don't know if I can. I said, well, if you're the slightest willingness, show the slightest willingness, and you can. And so he said, all right. And we closed our eyes, and he just gave it up as best he could and went to sleep. In the morning, we got up, and Whit had changed. He was peaceful, he was friendly, he was funny, he was fine. So what happened? He said, I don't know. I think it left in my sleep. I said, what did you ask the Holy Spirit? He said, I just said, take this horror from me. I do not know what to do with it. Ken came at 9 o'clock in the morning and rang the bell. I opened up the door. I could tell by his stature and his pallor that he was nervous. And he was sad. Whit went to the door. He threw his arms around Ken and he said, welcome, brother. It was over. It was totally, completely, and forever over. If I get a little emotional when I think of it, please forgive me, but I could be in that moment now and feel the miracle happen. And when it does, we're always made glad. I think we have another slide I'd like to show you.
Yes. So this is from chapter 11. If you ask, you will receive. The Holy Spirit will answer every specific problem as long as you believe that problems are specific.
As long as you believe that problems are specific. And one could ask, well, what does that mean? We've already told that we can ask the Holy Spirit, and we can ask on anything, no matter how specific it is. As long as you believe, as long as we think we are in the dream and it is our reality, we will get answers. Of course, once we know we're not, we don't really need them anymore, do we? But that's a very, very important one for me to remember all the time, because I do get asked a lot, well, do you ask the Holy Spirit everything? Well, when I remember, sure. But of course, I'm not going to say, what dress should I put on today? That's not true. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do ask, like, what should I wear today? Yeah, I don't want to decide. And it makes me feel better to know that I'm not in charge. And that's another thing about asking the Spirit for help. You know you're not in charge. There's a line in the Course I've always loved. I choose second place to gain the first. We gain the first place when we let God be in charge. We gain the first place when we let the Holy Spirit and the dream tell us what to do, because we give the problem up to that which knows. And when we give the problem up to that which knows, we can be sure that whatever the problem is, there will be resolution, and it will be the way it is best for us to have it resolved. Something funny happened to me a little while ago. I was wondering if I should even tell this one, but I think I can't help it. I'm not so young anymore, you noticed. And I needed to have some teeth extracted in the front, the bottom, exactly down here. And of course, I was going to be made a plate that didn't want to do any implant because of my age. And so I was going to have a plate made, and the doctor made something for me. And I got home and it hurt so much I couldn't wear it. Well, the very next day, I was receiving a wonderful treat. I was going to have a visit with someone I care for deeply and haven't seen in a long time. And he was bringing his wife for me to see. And I wanted everything to be perfect, but I couldn't wear those teeth. So how in the world am I going to see people I haven't seen in a long time looking like a toothless old hag? And it really, really bothered me. I couldn't seem to calm myself. The next day happened and I tried to call them to tell them not to come, but luckily they had already left and didn't have a cell phone on in the car. So I was beside myself with this nonsensical problem. And when the doorbell rang and they were about to walk in, I went to the door, and just before I opened it, I said, "Holy Spirit, help." I really meant it. And I opened the door, and in walked my very, very tall friend. He's well over 6 feet, maybe 6'4" or 6'5", and he had to double over to kiss me hello, and I had my hand in front of my mouth to disguise my empty teeth. And his wife then came and she put her arms around me, and she had her hand in front of her mouth. And I looked at her and she looked at me, and I took my hand away and showed her my space, and she took her hand away and showed me she had more teeth pulled than I. And we started to laugh and couldn't stop, because she didn't want to come to see me any more than I wanted them to come see me without the teeth in. Now, this is one of the silliest things that I can tell you, but there was so much humor in it and so much love, and we couldn't get over the whole visit. How remarkable it was that we were able to be in a place of total and complete love, not only of each other, but acceptance of ourselves. In these very difficult times, we know something extraordinary is happening in the world of form. But what is happening in the world of spirit? What kind of help can we turn to? As we hear in the news, more and more people are made ill, and there are more and more deaths. As we're confined to our homes, as we're worried about our families, as the world of form has pressed into us so much that we look as if and seem as if we're in darkness. We do. How do we handle this? It's a big one, and we all know it's a big one. We, as students of A Course in Miracles, are so blessed to be able to have a map that can tell us how to handle this. I'm not saying that I think if I close my eyes in a moment and say, "Holy Spirit, make it go away," I'm going to open my eyes and the world is going to be healed. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about going through the challenges in a different way. We're talking about asking for guidance in the moment. What do we do this moment to let go of the fear and to express love? Everything is either a call for love or an expression of it. This humongous world we've made, this dream that we've created, this is a call for love. How do we respond? Well, I was a little bit upset about it the other day too, of course, because I slip also. And I turned on the TV, which I don't do often because I'm really not anxious to hear the news. And there was the governor of the state of our state, California, not giving a speech, but speaking from his heart, telling us the wonderful news that he had turned to business and industry and individuals in our state and asked for help. And the gifts were pouring from all sections of the state to help in the emergency. Millions, but millions of masks were being supplied to hospitals. Everything that is needed, people are starting to get together to try to come up with. The call for love was answered with love. And then he went on to say that I'm in touch with all of the governors in the Western Division of the United States, and they're all telling me the same thing. These are the things we want to concentrate on. How awful the situation is. Yes, Holy Spirit, what do I do to help? How can I help? You may get such different answers, every single one of you that's participating today, and I am told that there are very many. That's because you're all staying home, right? Every single one of us can ask any moment or every moment, What can I do to be helpful? How can I change my mind from fear to love? Just imagine if tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people were asking the same question. How can I see this differently? How can I change my mind from fear to love? It's only perception. And the Holy Spirit helps us see in a different way. And the Holy Spirit is the vehicle through which miracles happen. It's not up to judge what the miracle is, but it is up to us to ask. I hope that each and every one of you can find in your hearts to ask that question and to have in mind that you want to extend love to every being that you know and see, to every thought that you have. Make it extend love. If we want to save time as we know it, and as we're told in A Course in Miracles, if we want to save time, I cannot think of a more perfect opportunity in which to do it. We save time by having thoughts of love. For every thought of love, hundreds of thousands of years as we know time are saved. Therefore, we have our challenge and we have our answer. May peace be with you all as you ask for guidance to bring peace. And may peace surround the world in its most difficult time. Let us awaken to our reality in God. Thank you.